The story of Jacob is one of the most intricate and compelling narratives in the Bible, found in the book of Genesis chapters 25 to 50. It is a story rich in drama, conflict, divine intervention, and transformation. Jacob's journey is a microcosm of the spiritual life, a struggle with identity, a battle with human frailty, and an encounter with divine grace that leads to redemption. To truly appreciate Jacob's story, we must explore the historical and cultural backdrop, the key turning points in his life, and the theological themes that emerge. Jacob's story is not only his own but also a critical chapter in the unfolding covenant between God and his chosen people. Jacob lived during the patriarchal period, a time when family, inheritance, and tribal identity were paramount. In this society, the firstborn son typically received the birthright, which included a double portion of the inheritance and leadership of the family. This cultural context sets the stage for much of the tension in Jacob's life, as he is not the firstborn but strives to claim the privileges associated with that status. Jacob is the grandson of Abraham, the recipient of God's covenant promise, "I will make of you a great nation," Genesis 12 verse 2. This covenant promised land, descendants, and blessings, not only for Abraham's family but for all nations through them. Jacob's story is a continuation of this covenant, yet his journey to embody it is fraught with human failings and divine grace. Jacob's relationship with his twin brother Esau reflects a common theme in Genesis: sibling rivalry. From Cain and Abel to Joseph and his brothers, this motif underscores the tension between human ambition and divine choice. The first act of Jacob's story sets the stage for the drama of his life, revealing his origins, character, and the divine purpose interwoven into his family's narrative. This segment of Jacob's life introduces themes of struggle, destiny, and God's sovereignty, which are further explored throughout his story. To appreciate its significance, we must consider the historical and theological context alongside the key events and personalities. Jacob's story begins within the framework of the Abrahamic covenant, a divine promise of land, descendants, and blessings that God made to Abraham. Isaac, Abraham's son, is the chosen heir of this covenant, and the narrative shifts to how this promise will be carried forward through Isaac's family. Isaac and Rebekah's union was divinely orchestrated as recorded in Genesis 24, emphasizing God's sovereignty in ensuring the covenant line continues. Yet, like Sarah before her, Rebekah is barren, creating tension in the narrative. Infertility was a significant challenge in the ancient Near East, as it threatened family lineage and inheritance. In the context of the covenant, it also raised questions about God's ability to fulfill his promises. In Genesis 25 verse 21, Isaac prays for Rebekah to conceive, and God answers his prayer. This act of intercession reflects Isaac's faith and demonstrates that the continuation of the covenant depends on divine intervention rather than human effort. Rebekah's pregnancy is marked by a troubling internal struggle. She feels the twins jostling within her and seeks God's guidance. This jostling foreshadows the conflict that will define Jacob's relationships and character. God reveals to Rebekah in Genesis 25 verse 23, "Two nations are in your womb, and two peoples from within you will be separated. One people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger." This prophecy establishes a central theme of the narrative: God's sovereignty in choosing the younger, weaker, or unexpected to fulfill his purposes. It challenges cultural norms, as the firstborn son typically held the birthright and the blessing. The two nations represent Israel, descended from Jacob, and Edom, descended from Esau, whose historical enmity reflects the sibling rivalry. The prophecy that the older will serve the younger points to God's prerogative to subvert human expectations and conventions. The birth of Isaac and Rebekah's twins is filled with symbolic details that hint at their future roles and personalities. Esau emerges first, described as red and hairy. His physical characteristics and rugged nature align with his later identity as a hunter and man of the field. The name Esau is linked to these traits. In ancient cultures, names often reflected physical traits or circumstances of birth. Esau's red complexion and hair foreshadow his future association with the land of Edom, whose name means red. Jacob follows, grasping Esau's heel in Genesis 25 verse 26. This act earns him the name Jacob, which means heel grabber or supplanter. The image of grasping the heel symbolizes his future as one who strives to surpass or displace others. Jacob's grasping reflects his inherent drive to achieve, often through cunning and manipulation. This trait will define his early life and serve as the foundation for his transformation. As the boys grow, their differing personalities and lifestyles become apparent, deepening the tension between them. Esau is described as a skilled hunter and a man of the open country. His physicality and impulsive nature reflect his alignment with earthly, immediate gratification. Hunting was a respected skill in ancient times, but it also symbolized a more transient and untethered way of life. Esau's identity as a hunter contrasts with the covenantal responsibilities that require stability and continuity. Jacob is described as a quiet man, dwelling in tents. This phrase indicates his contemplative and domestic nature, as well as his alignment with the pastoral lifestyle of his forefathers. Jacob represents the covenant's spiritual values, while Esau epitomizes physicality and worldliness. Their differing priorities set the stage for the birthright and blessing conflicts. The episode of Esau selling his birthright to Jacob in Genesis 25 verse 29 to 34 encapsulates their contrasting character traits and Jacob's early ambition. Returning famished from the field, Esau agrees to trade his birthright for a bowl of stew. His statement in Genesis 25 verse 32, "I am about to die, of what use is a birthright to me?" reflects his short-sightedness and disregard for the covenantal inheritance. Esau's actions reveal a lack of spiritual discernment. The birthright, representing the covenantal promises of God, is dismissed for immediate physical satisfaction. This attitude is later condemned in Hebrews 12 verse 16 to 17, which describes Esau as godless for despising his birthright. Jacob seizes the opportunity to secure the birthright, demonstrating his strategic, albeit manipulative, nature. While his ambition aligns with the covenant's significance, his methods reveal his moral shortcomings. The red lentil stew is a subtle nod to Esau's association with red, Edom. It symbolizes his earthly and fleshly priorities, which lead him to forfeit his spiritual heritage. Jacob's selection as the covenant-bearer demonstrates God's prerogative to choose whom he wills, often contrary to human expectations. Jacob and Esau's rivalry reflects the broader theme of struggle in the spiritual journey, where God's purposes often unfold through tension and conflict. The birthright episode underscores the importance of valuing spiritual blessings over immediate gratification. Esau's disregard serves as a cautionary tale. Jacob's cunning nature highlights human imperfection, yet God's plan continues to unfold through his life. This foreshadows the transformative work of grace in his journey. Jacob's deception unfolds in a household charged with conflicting allegiances and unresolved tensions. At the heart of this drama lies the blessing of Isaac, a patriarchal tradition of profound significance. In ancient Near Eastern culture, the patriarch's blessing was more than words of goodwill. It carried legal and spiritual authority, often designating the leader of the next generation and conferring divine promises. Jacob had already acquired the birthright, inheritance of wealth and leadership, through Esau's impulsive trade. However, the blessing, which conferred God's covenantal promises, remained in Esau's grasp as the eldest son. Isaac, now old and nearly blind, favors Esau, the hunter and outdoorsman, over Jacob, the quieter, tent-dwelling son, as recorded in Genesis 27 verse 1 to 4. This favoritism sets the stage for conflict, as Isaac plans to bless Esau despite God's earlier revelation to Rebekah that the older will serve the younger. Isaac's preference for Esau, despite God's prophecy, highlights the recurring human tendency to favor personal desires over divine will. It sets up a scenario where God's sovereignty will prevail, even through human frailty and deception. Rebekah conspires with Jacob to deceive Isaac, who intends to bless Esau before his death. Jacob disguises himself as Esau, using goat skins to mimic Esau's hairy skin. The deception works, and Jacob receives the blessing intended for his brother. The blessing includes these words: Genesis 27 verse 28 to 29. "May God give you of the dew of heaven and of the fatness of the earth. Be Lord over your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you." This act of deceit sets Jacob on a path of conflict and exile. When Esau discovers the deception, he vows to kill Jacob. Rebekah urges Jacob to flee to her brother Laban in Haran. This marks a turning point, as Jacob leaves his home under a cloud of fear and estrangement. In the ancient Near East, blessings were seen as irrevocable. Once Isaac bestowed the blessing on Jacob, it could not be undone, emphasizing the weight of spoken words and divine destiny. On his journey, Jacob has a profound dream of a ladder or stairway, reaching to heaven, with angels ascending and descending on it. God speaks to him, reaffirming the covenant made with Abraham in Genesis 28 verse 13. I am the Lord, the God of Abraham your father and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie I will give to you and to your offspring. Jacob responds by naming the place Bethel, house of God, and vows to serve the Lord if he protects him. This moment marks the beginning of Jacob's spiritual awakening. Despite his flawed character, God chooses to reaffirm his promises, demonstrating that his plans are not dependent on human perfection. In Haran, Jacob encounters Laban, a master manipulator. Jacob falls in love with Laban's daughter Rachel and agrees to work 7 years for her hand in marriage. However, Laban deceives Jacob by substituting Leah, Rachel's older sister, on the wedding night. Jacob is forced to work an additional 7 years for Rachel. Jacob, the deceiver, becomes the deceived. This poetic justice highlights the principle of sowing and reaping, yet it also becomes a period of growth and refinement for Jacob. Over the next 2 decades, Jacob amasses wealth and family, but not without conflict. Through cunning and divine favor, he prospers despite Laban's repeated attempts to cheat him. God calls Jacob to return to the land of his fathers, promising his presence and protection. This marks another turning point, as Jacob must confront his past and reconcile with Esau. As Jacob approaches Canaan, he learns that Esau is coming to meet him with 400 men. Fearing for his life, Jacob divides his household and prays for deliverance, acknowledging his unworthiness in Genesis 32 verse 10. I am not worthy of the least of all the deeds of steadfast love and all the faithfulness that you have shown to your servant. The night before meeting Esau, Jacob wrestles with a mysterious man, later revealed to be God. This physical and spiritual struggle ends with Jacob receiving a new name, Israel, meaning he struggles with God as recorded in Genesis 32 verse 28. Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with men, and have prevailed. Jacob emerges limping but transformed. The limp becomes a symbol of his dependence on God. To Jacob's surprise, Esau greets him with forgiveness and embraces him. This act of reconciliation is a testament to God's work in both brothers' hearts. Jacob returns to Bethel, where he builds an altar and reaffirms his commitment to God. This act symbolizes a full-circle moment, as he acknowledges God's faithfulness throughout his journey. Jacob's 12 sons become the fathers of the 12 tribes of Israel, solidifying his role in God's covenant plan. Despite ongoing family dysfunction, God's promises are fulfilled through Jacob's descendants. In his final days, Jacob blesses his sons, prophesying their future roles in the nation of Israel. His blessing of Judah includes a messianic prophecy in Genesis 49 verse 10. The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until tribute comes to him. This points to the coming of Christ, the ultimate fulfillment of God's covenant. Jacob's life is a profound example of progressive spiritual maturity. Unlike his grandfather Abraham, whose faith is often portrayed as immediate and unwavering, Jacob's relationship with God evolves over time through a series of trials and divine encounters. After fleeing from Esau, Jacob's encounter at Bethel marks his first significant interaction with God. The vision of the ladder reaching to heaven is rich with symbolism. The ladder signifies God's intention to bridge the gap between divine holiness and human frailty. Jacob, a man marked by deceit, is still invited into a relationship with God, foreshadowing the ultimate reconciliation through Christ. Jesus himself refers to this vision in John 1 verse 51. Truly, truly, I say to you, you will see heaven opened, and the angels of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man. God reaffirms the covenant to Jacob, promising land, descendants, and blessings. What's remarkable is that this encounter occurs not because Jacob deserves it, but because God's promises to Abraham and Isaac are steadfast. Jacob's response at Bethel in Genesis 28 verse 20-22 reveals his conditional faith. He vows to serve God and tithe only if God protects and provides for him. This conditionality reflects his immature understanding of God's unconditional promises. Jacob's time in Haran serves as a crucible for his character. While the initial years appear to be filled with romantic pursuit and professional success, the underlying narrative reveals God's refining process. Jacob, who had manipulated his brother and father, finds himself outwitted by Laban. This reversal teaches Jacob humility and patience, as he works 14 years for Rachel and another 6 for his flocks. Although the text does not record direct divine interventions during Jacob's time in Haran, God's hand is evident in Jacob's growing prosperity and the ultimate call to return to Canaan. This period reminds us that God often works behind the scenes, shaping us in ways we may not immediately recognize. The complexities of Jacob's marriages to Leah and Rachel introduce tensions that persist for generations. Yet even here, God uses these flawed relationships to bring about his purposes, as Jacob's children become the patriarchs of Israel's tribes. Jacob's wrestling match at Peniel in Genesis 32 verse 22-32 is a turning point in his spiritual journey. This dramatic encounter is unparalleled in its physicality and intimacy. Jacob's struggle with the divine being represents the spiritual wrestling that occurs when human self-reliance meets divine sovereignty. Jacob had spent his life striving to secure blessings through manipulation and cunning. At Peniel, he must confront his limitations and acknowledge his dependence on God. God renames Jacob as Israel, symbolizing a new identity. No longer defined by deceit, Jacob becomes one who wrestles with God and prevails, not by overpowering God, but by clinging to him in desperate faith. Jacob's limp serves as a lifelong reminder of this encounter. It represents both his brokenness and his transformation. From this point on, Jacob's story takes on a deeper spiritual dimension, as he learns to rely more fully on God's guidance. The reconciliation between Jacob and Esau is one of the most poignant moments in Genesis. It demonstrates the power of God's work in softening hearts and healing relationships. Jacob sends gifts ahead to Esau, demonstrating humility and a desire to make amends. His actions reflect genuine repentance and a recognition of the wrongs he had committed. Esau's embrace of Jacob is unexpected and moving. Despite years of animosity, Esau forgives his brother, showing that reconciliation is possible even in the most fractured relationships. This moment prefigures the forgiveness we receive through Christ. Just as Esau ran to embrace Jacob, God welcomes repentant sinners with open arms. Jacob's later life is marked by continued struggles, but also by moments of profound faith and legacy building. Rachel's death during the birth of Benjamin is a bittersweet moment. While Jacob gains another son, he loses the wife he loved most deeply. This event underscores the theme of sacrifice and loss woven throughout Jacob's life. Jacob's favoritism toward Joseph mirrors the dysfunction he experienced in his own family. This favoritism fuels jealousy among his other sons, leading to Joseph's betrayal. Yet even this act of betrayal becomes a vehicle for God's redemptive plan. Before his death, Jacob blesses each of his 12 sons. These blessings are prophetic, revealing the future roles of the tribes of Israel. Of particular significance is his blessing of Judah in Genesis 49 verse 10. The scepter shall not depart from Judah, and to him shall be the obedience of the peoples. This prophecy points to the coming of the Messiah, Jesus Christ, who would arise from the tribe of Judah. Jacob's story resonates with us because it captures the complexity of the human condition. His life is a tapestry of ambition, struggle, failure, and redemption. Here are key themes to reflect on. The power of God's sovereignty. God's choice of Jacob, despite his flaws, reminds us that his purposes are not hindered by human weakness. God works through our imperfections to fulfill his plans. The necessity of transformation. Jacob's journey is a story of transformation. From a deceiver to a man who clings to God, Jacob's life encourages us to embrace the process of spiritual growth, even when it involves wrestling with God. The gift of reconciliation. The reconciliation between Jacob and Esau shows that no relationship is beyond repair. Through humility and God's grace, broken relationships can be healed. Living for legacy. Jacob's blessings on his sons remind us that our lives have ripple effects on future generations. How we live our faith today shapes the spiritual inheritance we leave behind. Jacob's story is a profound reminder of God's relentless faithfulness. Despite Jacob's flaws and failures, God's covenant promises endure. Jacob's life invites us to trust in God's grace, wrestle with him in our struggles, and ultimately walk in the new identity he gives us. Like Jacob, we may limp, but we do so as people transformed by the touch of God. Let us live with the faith that God's purposes will prevail, both in our lives and in his grand story of redemption.